Some disasters leave behind evidence, some tragedies leave behind survivors. But on a frozen mountain in the Ural wilderness, 9 hikers died in a way so strange, so violent, and so impossible to explain that today, more than 60 years later, nobody, not scientists, not investigators, not even modern forensics can say for certain what happened. What they found instead were footprints leading into darkness, bodies scattered across the snow, injuries no human could survive, and a tent torn open from the inside. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, the night the mountain itself seemed to turn against them. Some disasters leave behind evidence and others leave behind survivors. But on a frozen mountain in the Ural wilderness, 9 hikers died in a way so strange that even today, more than 60 years later, nobody can fully explain what happened. Investigators found footprints leading away from a slashed tent, bodies scattered across the snow, and injuries no human should be able to survive. The fear captured in that frozen landscape has echoed through history ever since. This is what happened on the night the mountains seemed to turn against them. The journey began quietly in late January of 1959, when 9 university students prepared their gear in a small Siberian town. They were young, experienced, and confident in the skills that had carried them through countless expeditions. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was a man people trusted without hesitation. He was smart, calm, and disciplined in ways that inspired the rest of the group. As they posed for photos and joked together, none of them sensed the darkness waiting ahead. On January 27th, they stepped onto the trail that wound deep into the Ural Mountains. Snow blanketed the land, stretching in every direction like a frozen ocean. The air was sharp enough to sting their lungs, but spirits stayed high as they moved deeper into silence. Each day, they documented their progress with journal entries and cheerful photographs. These would later become the final peaceful record of their lives. By the 3rd day, the forest began to thin. The wind grew stronger, pushing at them with a force that hinted at the unforgiving terrain ahead. They reached a region the local Mansi people called Dead Mountain, not for anything supernatural, but because no animals lived there. The name lingered in the air, unsettling some of the hikers in a way none of them admitted. The tree line fell behind them as they entered the barren slopes. On the night of January 31st, they camped near the edge of the trees. They built a fire, shared food, and laughed through the growling wind overhead. Snow drifted into their clothes as branches creaked in the dark, but the group stayed optimistic. Storms were normal here. Nothing seemed unusual enough to worry them. It was the last night anyone would see them alive. A storm arrived sometime after midnight. Not a gradual shift in weather, but a sudden, violent change like a door slamming shut. The wind tore through the trees with enough force to shake loose branches, and snow whipped across the clearing in blinding waves. Some of the hikers woke and checked their gear, adjusting lines and securing supplies. Their journals from that night mentioned only the wind, nothing that suggested fear. The next morning, the storm still raged. Visibility dropped until the world around them became a swirling white void. One hiker wrote a sentence that would later unsettle investigators. "We are not alone on the mountain." No explanation followed. No details, just that one chilling thought recorded quietly between routine observations. On February 1st, they continued upward. Lost in the storm, they drifted off their intended path without realizing it. The wind pushed at them relentlessly, as if trying to force them back toward the forest they had left behind. Eventually, Igor made a decision that would puzzle investigators for decades. Instead of returning to the tree line for shelter, the group set up camp on the open slope. The tent stood exposed on the bare mountainside, battered by wind and buried quickly by drifting snow. Inside, the The 9 hikers huddled together, writing in their journals and sharing quiet conversations before sleep. The last photos taken showed them smiling, unaware of the terror creeping toward their fragile shelter. The temperature outside plunged below -30 degrees. The mountainside groaned beneath the storm. Sometime after midnight, everything changed. The hikers were jolted awake by something far more alarming than the wind. No one knows what they saw or heard inside that tent, but whatever it was drove them into a state of absolute panic. They cut their way out from the inside, slicing through the fabric instead of using the entrance. 9 trained mountaineers fled half-dressed into a killing storm, leaving behind boots, coats, and survival gear. Their footprints revealed no hesitation. They did not gather supplies, they did not argue or return for equipment, they ran. Something terrified them enough to choose certain death over staying inside that tent even 1 second longer. Their tracks descended the slope and scattered toward the forest. Some walked, some sprinted, some crawled. Whatever they fled from left, no clear sign in the snow. The storm swallowed their shapes as they disappeared into the dark. When rescuers began searching the mountainside days later, they found the tent exactly where the hikers had left it. It was half buried in snow, leaning at an odd angle and torn open from the inside. The cuts were clean, deliberate, and desperate. It was clear something had terrified 9 experienced hikers enough to make them rip their only shelter apart in the middle of a deadly storm. Inside the tent, investigators found everything the group needed to survive. Boots lined up neatly along one side, food laid out as if they had planned to eat again soon, and jackets stacked where the hikers had left them. It looked as though the group expected to return at any moment. The calmness of the interior contrasted violently with the panic implied by the slashed canvas. Footprints led away from the tent in several directions, all descending toward the forest. Some prints belonged to people wearing socks, some were barefoot. Others appeared to belong to people with only one shoe on. The rescuers followed the steps until they reached the edge of the trees, where the trail began to split. The first 2 bodies were found beneath a large cedar tree. Their names were Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. They were barefoot, dressed only in underwear and torn shirts, and lying side by side in the snow. Around them, the branches were broken up to 15 feet high, suggesting they had climbed the tree in a frantic attempt to escape something on the ground. Beneath the cedar, rescuers found the remains of a small fire that had burned briefly before being extinguished by the storm. The bark on the tree was stripped away in long claw-like shapes, where the men had torn it off with their hands. Their skin was blackened by the cold and frostbitten beyond recognition, yet their faces were twisted not just in pain, but in fear. A few hundred meters away they found the next body, Igor Dyatlov. He lay on his back, his hands clenched, his face turned toward the slope, as though he had been trying to crawl back to the tent. His injuries were minimal, no fractures or wounds. It looked as though he simply lay down in the snow and died, unable to reach safety. Nearby, they found Zina Kolmogorova. She had fallen face first into the snow, her arms stiff in front of her, as if she had been struggling forward until her final breath. Her footprints showed she had fought harder than anyone, walking and then staggering and then dragging herself step by step. She wore only light clothing, yet the determination in her final movements haunted investigators for years. Further up the slope lay Rustem Slobodin. His death seemed simple at first, another victim of hypothermia, but his skull had a small fracture. It wasn't enough to kill him instantly, but strange enough to raise questions. He seemed to have collapsed several times before dying, his body freezing in the exact position he fell. These first 5 deaths could be explained by cold, exhaustion, and the chaos of fleeing the tent. But the remaining 4 hikers were missing. Rescuers searched for 3 more months before the spring thaw exposed something hidden deep in the snow. What they found next would transform a tragic accident into one of the most disturbing mysteries in modern history. In May, the bodies of the last 4 hikers were discovered in a ravine beneath several feet of compacted snow. They were clothed more warmly than the others, suggesting they had taken clothing from their fallen friends in a desperate attempt to survive. But their injuries defied all logic. Not one of them showed any sign of external trauma, yet inside their bodies, bones were shattered. One hiker, Lyudmila Dubinina, had broken ribs so severe they resembled injuries from a high-speed car crash. Her heart and lung cavities were filled with blood, but her skin showed no bruising. Her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips were missing, which investigators first blamed on animals. But the clean, deliberate appearance of the removal made many experts uncomfortable with that explanation. Another hiker, Semyon Zolotaryov, had chest injuries that matched Lyudmila's, massive internal damage with no corresponding marks on the outside. The force required to cause such injuries would have been enormous. The coroner famously stated it was equal to the impact of a car moving at high speed. Yet no one could explain how such damage occurred on a snow-covered mountain with no vehicles, no falls, and no cliffs. The final 2 hikers had similar strange details. One had a broken nose and a twisted neck, with eyes missing but no sign of struggle. The other had deep head trauma that seemed impossible without external force. These injuries did not match frostbite, hypothermia, or natural accidents. They matched something else, something violent and powerful. Rescuers also found a strange piece of evidence near the ravine. In the snow around the bodies, there were no signs of a struggle, no tracks from another person or animal, and no indication that the hikers had been dragged. It was as if the injuries had been inflicted without physical contact. The snow was perfectly undisturbed. Theories spread like wildfire. Some suggested an avalanche, but there was no debris and no slope angle to support it. Others blamed secret military tests, citing reports of strange glowing orbs in the sky the night the hikers died. Some believed the Mansi people attacked them, but there were no signs of violence from weapons, and the Mansi themselves assisted in the search. Still others whispered about infrasound, powerful low-frequency vibrations caused by wind that can induce panic and hallucination. But infrasound could not crush bones or remove organs with surgical precision. It was a partial explanation at best, and it left far more questions than answers. The most chilling theory came from the footprints. According to investigators, several of the prints did not match ordinary walking. Some showed long strides that human legs could not naturally produce. Some prints seemed deep without a body's full weight behind them, and some looked as though they had been made by someone walking calmly toward the tent, not away from it. The idea that something approached the tent, rather than the hikers fleeing an internal emergency, unsettled everyone who studied the case. The slashed tent, the barefoot sprint, the scattered bodies, and the violent internal injuries created a picture of absolute terror. Something had driven them down that mountain. And whatever it was, it moved in ways no person should move. By the time the investigation closed, officials gave a vague explanation. A compelling natural force. They didn't define it. They didn't clarify it. They simply wrote it, closed the file, and walked away. But the truth lay frozen in the snow with the hikers, untouched, unanswered, and unsolved. The official investigation ended quickly, but the fear surrounding the case did not. Families demanded answers, researchers pushed for explanations, and locals whispered warnings about the mountain. Even the rescuers who found the bodies struggled with what they saw. Many believed the hikers were running not just from fear, but from something with intent. Years passed and theories multiplied. Avalanche experts insisted the group panicked after hearing a shift in the snowpack, but the slope angle was too shallow and there was no displaced snow. The tent remained partially standing, and the hikers' footprints were perfectly preserved. No avalanche moves gently enough to leave a trail of barefoot tracks. Some investigators proposed military tests. The Soviet Union often experimented with parachute mines and secret weapons in remote areas. These devices could create concussive waves strong enough to knock people off their feet or crush internal organs without leaving external marks. But no fragments were found in the snow, and the military denied operating in the area. Others turned to the sky. Witnesses from nearby towns reported strange glowing orbs drifting over the mountains on the same night the hikers died. Bright spheres pulsed above the tree line, moving in silence. The hikers themselves even wrote about flashes in the sky days before they died. Whether these lights were military flares, meteor fragments, or something else entirely remains unknown. One of the strangest theories involved infrasound, a low-frequency vibration produced by wind passing over the mountain's shape. Some scientists believe these vibrations could induce panic, hallucinations, and paranoia. It could explain why the hikers fled the tent in terror. But infrasound cannot crush ribs or remove tongues. The Mansi people offered a different explanation. They believed the hikers had entered a forbidden place, disturbing something ancient that lived on the mountain. According to their legends, Kholat Syakhl was home to spirits that stalked the snow during storms. These spirits were said to mimic human movement and punish those who trespassed. It wasn't evidence, but it was a story that lingered in the minds of investigators. But one detail made every theory feel incomplete. The footprints leading away from the tent included 9 human sets, and one set that didn't match. It was deeper, longer, and spaced strangely, as if made by a creature with an unnaturally long stride. The investigators documented it briefly, then removed it from reports. No reason was ever given. The ravine where the last 4 hikers were found also raised unsettling questions. The snow around their bodies was strangely compacted, almost as if heavy pressure had been applied from above. Yet no rocks or debris had fallen, and there was no sign of a struggle. It looked as though something huge had pressed down on them without touching the snow around them. Even more disturbing was the radiation found on the hikers' clothing. Several garments showed levels too high to be explained by random environmental exposure. Some suggested they had worked with radioactive materials in the past, but the specific isotopes did not match civilian sources. The origin of the radiation was never determined. When rescuers returned the hikers' belongings to the families, strange items were reported missing. A camera with the final frame showing a blurry flash, a notebook with a page torn out, a piece of equipment that no one could identify. It was as if someone had taken only the objects that might reveal too much. Despite all this, the case was closed with a vague conclusion. Officials wrote that the hikers died from an unknown compelling force. They offered no definition, no mechanism, and no explanation. The phrase felt like a placeholder, something written because the truth was too unsettling to put on paper. Over the decades, new evidence surfaced. In 2013, a group of researchers re-examined the tent and suggested it hadn't been cut from the inside with fear, but with intention. They argued the hikers made a controlled exit. But this theory fell apart when matched with the frantic footprints and the extreme injuries. Nothing about the scene suggested calm decision-making. Then in 2019, the Russian government reopened the case. The new investigation proposed that a snow slab avalanche caused everything, but the report ignored the footprint patterns, the internal injuries, the radiation, and the missing organs. It was a simple explanation for a problem that was anything but simple. Most experts dismissed the conclusion immediately. Today the mountain still stands, silent and wind-battered, its slopes unchanged since the night the 9 hikers ran into the dark. Tourists occasionally visit, but few stay long. Climbers report strange sounds echoing through the snow, as if voices drift across the wind. Some claim to see shapes in the fog, tall, thin figures standing motionless in the distance. Locals say the mountain watches those who approach it. They say the wind carries more than just cold. They say the hikers' panic did not come from weather or fear. It came from seeing something they were never meant to see. And then there is the last piece of evidence, something almost no one talks about. Months after the incident, a rescue worker found a camera lens deep in the snow near the ravine. It was cracked, frozen, and nearly invisible against the ice. When thawed and cleaned, a single blurred image could be pulled from its film. The picture was dark and grainy, but one thing stood out in the center. A tall, shadow-like shape standing between the trees. No report mentioned it. It was quietly filed away, and the lens disappeared soon after. People argue endlessly about what happened on the mountain. They debate avalanches, weapons, spirits, conspiracies, and science. But none of those explanations fit perfectly. Every theory leaves behind contradictions, missing pieces, or details too strange to dismiss. The truth remains locked in the snow of that barren slope. Whatever happened that night, it terrified 9 experienced hikers into running barefoot into a lethal storm. It crushed bones without touching skin. It erased parts of bodies without leaving marks. And it left no trace of itself behind. The Dyatlov Pass incident is not just a mystery. It is a reminder that the world is still home to places that do not care if we understand them. Places that do not explain themselves, places that simply wait. If the hikers saw something in the dark that night, they carried that secret into the snow with them. Their final moments are buried under years of ice, unanswered questions, and theories that only reveal how much we still don't know. And perhaps it's better that way. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only remembered. This one continues to stare back from the frozen silence of Kholat Shachel.